goodwill beginner, all my good works are needles in hay, and I try to do right based on my own sight, just like a blind man who's standing in the way, and all that I've taken, it was sadly mistaken to bleed for my own, for my sake. Now everything I have was stolen or borrowed. All that I've taken is much more than I can take. I was a fool in the quickness of the sand, and I was a leper trying to save my own skin, but now I'm a man who knows where I stand on the rock of ages. That's where I stand. Lord, you bore my refuse, and you are my refuge. You gave up everything when you threw it all away. You gave me life new. You carried my weight through the evening to the morning and to the day. I was a fool in the quickness of the sand. I was a leper trying to save my own skin, but now I'm a man who knows where I stand on the rock of ages. Jesus, that's where I stand on the rock of ages. Jesus, that's where I stand.
I like shiny things too. So welcome to Calvary Chapel Greenville, Texas on this fine Wednesday night. We're talking about all sorts of things, vanity and shiny things. So that's how it works out. We are going to start the book of Ecclesiastes in just a minute, but before we do that, let's look at women's ministry. That's going to happen Tuesday night, every Tuesday night. This room is kind of blue too. Did you miss last night or something? Is that look? She was here. Okay. So anyways, 6 p.m. here on Tuesday nights. On Wednesday nights now we are starting the book of Ecclesiastes. You see that. And we'll be here for a little while. It's the digging I've done. Man, this thing is like opening a can. And it's like next week is even more. Third chapter gets even, it's just like it's good. I'm excited for it anyways. All right. On the first Wednesday coming up, that'll be Self-Control, the last of Don's series on the fruit of the Spirit. We'll see if he's going to start another series or if he's just going to wing it after that. Also on the first Wednesday, we have communion. The next one coming up is October 4th. All righty. Men's prayer Friday mornings at 6 a.m. And I know what you're thinking. Man, that's early. But Todd says, not early enough. I want to get here at 4. So we'll just do 6 a.m. instead. All right, men's breakfast. Next one coming up is September 23rd. That'll be right here, and I have not been instructed any other way to do the food, so we're going to probably just track on as normal. And the fellowship meal coming up. Yeah, that's wrong. Well, mine still hasn't been updated from last time. It's tailgating. Let's see here. October 1st. No? We better get your calendar out. Look at your calendar. Are you looking at your calendar? Do you know that for sure? You know what my calendar says? October 1st is that Sunday, so that's a fact. So anyways, that's what we're doing there. All right, Sundays as for right now, we're going through the Gospel of Mark. And I think that's it. Let's get started. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I know what you're thinking. John, are you going to introduce the book? Of course I am. Don't you know any better? Of course we are. So the book of Ecclesiastes, man, I'm telling you right now, the theme, and of course you see it on your screens there, is vanity, vanity, it's all vanity. Now, you can say, well, the mirror is vanity and stuff like that, but this is really, I think, is really captured it quite well because it's a broken mirror. And as we go in here, as we dig and we look at it, you're going to see that this is just an odd setting and an odd place. The author of the book is none other than King Solomon. You say, well, John, how do you get to that idea? Why would you ever think that it's King Solomon? Well, let me tell you why. In verse 1, and we're going to start that fast reading the verses, isn't that wild? In verse 1 says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And then he begins the vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And so just at the very beginning of that, in verse 1, the words of the preacher, the proclaimer, the one who's giving that information out. And you think, well, is Solomon a preacher? In the setting that it is now, the answer is an easy yes. And here's why and here's how. The book is called Ecclesiastes. Does anybody know what the Greek word ecclesia is? It's a gathering. You have ecclesiology, it's church. So we would say that if you look at, in the Spanish, iglesia, that's the church, right? Ecclesia. So it's the same basic root thing we're seeing there. And so but here really it's just more of like the call together of a group of people, this big event where they tell and say all these things. And so Ecclesiastes is that thing. Basically, King Solomon is saying, hey guys, here's what I found in life. Let me tell you about all the details. Let me tell you all the nuance and all the small things that are there. And so the book of Ecclesiastes is really just him kind of, reflecting after a long life. Now, we don't know exactly when it was written. We guess, based on the writing and based on what we see in the other books that he wrote, which would be Proverbs And the Song of Solomon, incidentally, if you ever do a Bible search for the name Solomon, it takes you to the book and not to the individual names, which I thought was pretty annoying. It's like, all right, let me back up and try that again. Anyways, that's something that I found is like, well, I guess it is his name, you know. I mean, it gets to be like looking up Samuel or something. You get either first or I'm not sure. But Solomon, it looks like probably wrote this book towards the end of his life. And we see that because it's like the reflections of an old man. Have you ever talked to some old guy, like the guy that chases you off the front yard and says, hey, guy, you know, get off my lawn and, you know, stop. And that guy has just like this kind of a reference point that nobody else has. He's experienced things. He's lived things. And so a lot of what we see here is after years of experience and living from old Solomon. In the beginning of his passage there, though, he lays out who he is, preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. There's only one person that fit that category. That would be him. And then he cranks him to the vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And then he asks this incredible question, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And so a few things we need to remember as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes is two things, vanity of vanities. We're going to see vanity 37 times. You're like, that's exciting. In some translations, apparently hits 38 times. I didn't count how many were in my particular translation, but let's just go 37, 38-ish right there, okay? And then we're also going to see under the sun. It's like the all-encompassing thing, everything that's around. When we say all the stuff, he can say it really easily by saying all that, you know, is under the sun. What's under the sun? Well, I don't know, like the whole earth, right? You say, well, not at night. Well, I get that. So vanity, the word here, and again, so if you ladies are thinking, well, it's that little desk with the mirror behind it that I sit at to do my makeup and all that nonsense, that's not the definition here. So like, oh no. What about that song where it says, you're so vain? You probably think the song is about you or whatever. And I missed that definition also. So we're in a different thing. This is, and we're going to look at what the Strong's group, or James Strong says it was. The Hebrew word hebel, and this is where they get the word from, emptiness or vanity, figuratively something transitory and unsatisfactory, often used as a verb. And the way Warren Wiersbe described it, and I like his wording a lot on this stuff, says the word means emptiness, futility, vapor, that which vanishes quickly and leaves nothing behind. And so with that information, when we see the vanity thing, we realize that it's pretty much just a waste. It's, you know, okay, well, but from that perspective, that understanding, I think we can move a lot smoother with it. King Solomon, we need to talk about him. We're actually going to talk about him a lot as we get started. And you're going to go, wait a minute, I'm tired of talking about this dude. I totally get it. But we have to understand the perspective from which it was written. We have to understand the man who wrote it to a certain level. And we don't have to know everything, like what did he have for lunch on Tuesday. We don't need to know that information. But the basic structure of who he is and what's going on. King Solomon, if you'll recall, began his rule and reign as just this pleasant, humble, God-seeking kind of a guy. God says, you know, hey, you can have anything. What would you have? And he chose wisdom. And you think, man, this guy is super awesome. But over time, he began to turn away from his original roots. You say, you make the argument, he's no King David, and that's true, he's no King David. But he turned away from his roots. He turned away from the one we would call creator God. Now, I make that distinction because, you know, when we just say God, it's a generic term. And so I've gotten to where I just really prefer to kind of clarify what God we're talking about. The creator, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, that God, Jehovah, Yahweh, however you want to say it. That one. So he turns away from God, and then he begins to follow, and with the assistance of his wives, false gods. So he's chasing after idolatry. And you're thinking, wait a second, that's not how it's supposed to happen. And you're right about that, see? The marriages, and we're going to cover that here in just a moment because, again, we need to understand Solomon. He had probably the biggest headache of any man in the history of life, and because he had so many wives and concubines. Now, the marriages that he was involved in were probably, and I'm going to say the majority of them were motivated by politics. You're thinking, no, there's no way things could be motivated by politics. Well, that's where you're wrong, because it does happen. But they would have been marriages based on politics, not love. And if you look at it from like kind of like a treaty mindset, for him to get involved with these other nations, it just helps Israel. So you think, well, that's a pretty wise move. Well, but not at the expense of his job as a king. See, the kings in Israel actually had restrictions and things that they were supposed to hold on to. Now, I would make the argument, personally, that we, just as individual men, should adopt this mindset. And I think we would do quite well. Although I think most people wouldn't adopt it, but they could adopt it, and I think it would work quite well. But looking at Deuteronomy chapter 17, let's look through verses 14 through 20. This is when, and this is the instructions for the kings. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You shall not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never turn that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priest, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So just in that one part, we see some things that were going to be problematic for King Solomon. The collecting of all the wealth. Well, he kind of did that. The collecting of the horses. No, he did that too. The collecting of all the wives. Well, he really did that one. I mean, he just like, you know what? That's not enough. You got 10 wives. Man, I just see me as being more like 1,000 kind of guy. He was motivated to what? He was the collector of wives. And for those of us in here who are married, you're thinking, one's enough. I mean, 2 of them, I don't think so. That fella on TV got up to 4 of them, and that didn't work out for him. They're all kind of dissipated now, I guess. Could have told you that could have happened. I wouldn't know that it did. I'm not prophetic in that sense. I just know the situation based on what I've read in the Bible. As I study my Bible, I see things that work and things that don't. The king should be the same way. Now that we've understood and we kind of have an idea of what about the kings, what they're supposed to do, basically limited. They're supposed to be accessible to people, not high and mighty, walk in, kiss my ring, that kind of thing. No, not like that. All the nations around them had those kind of kings, so couldn't they have that kind of king? Well, no. Because if you think about it, who is the king of Israel? Well, that's Jesus. And so if God be their king, then the other person is just a stand-in as a temporary measure, right? And not really the king, just kind of the appointed guy who's there at the time. And what's interesting about it is the mindset that was given by Moses, of course by God through Moses, in that they should just be normal, run-of-the-mill, no, weird stuff. They just guys, man. But not Solomon. Oh no, not him. Now this is what actually precedes this book, if you think about it, as far as timelines go. But we're going to find out some things about Solomon. If I don't retype my notes here. It's always bad when you start retyping and like, oh no, that's a Bible verse, don't mess it up. So if I say something slightly off, it's because I typed it. In 1 Kings chapter 11, we'll look at verses 1 through 8. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonite, and the Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods. And you think, man, this guy is just really messed up. And he did. There's no doubt about that. He married into all the nations he was told not to. So he was very disobedient in that sense. And it doesn't really matter what your motivation is. If God tells you don't do it, then don't do it. If his motivation was to build some kind of a governmental unity so he is the best politician ever, yeah, don't do that. You're doing the wrong thing. And so as we look at that, you just scratch your head and think, why? Why would you do that? So that is the basics of our good buddy King Solomon. So when he writes, vanity is a vanity, says the preacher, vanity is vanity, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil which he toils under the earth? When we go back to verse 3 and we read that and we say, wait a second. Why is he coming from that perspective? Because he came from that perspective. What's interesting, and of course, Ecclesiastes is really going to lay itself out well, and we're going to see all the nuance and details, and you're going to go, okay, this makes total sense. But at the onset of it, you think, well, man, this guy's really upset and annoyed with life, and he's a grumpy old man. And that's true to a point, I'm sure. But you'll see that he understands how to get back and get right, and that's stay Christ-focused. Now, he wouldn't use those words because he didn't understand it in that way that we do. But in order for us to do things well and to do all the things what we got to do, we need to stay Christ-focused. So is the case with him. He obviously didn't do that. So when we're not Christ-focused and we're being destroyed by the world and everything, like, oh man, I can't believe this. And you talk to atheists or agnostics and people who don't have Jesus, just basically people who are not Christ believers or Christians or Jesus people. And you talk to these people, there is not a lot of hope. And I was actually talking about one of the famous guys there, Robin Williams, today. He came up as a matter of topic. You knew who Robin Williams is? The actor back in the day, right? He was everybody's best friend. He was the Mr. Shining, all sorts of, he was the guy. And everybody just loved being around Robin Williams. Robin Williams did not love being around Robin Williams. He was fighting demons, things were going bad, things were going wrong, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse, and as it tends to do. And he ends up killing himself. Because I think he saw after a time, and he lived his life, and he kind of see from Solomon's perspective, vanity's vanity, says the preacher. Vanity's vanity, all is vanity. And so he could see that. And what does a man gain by the toil at which he toils under the sun? Man, that's a great question, because eternally speaking, what do we gain on this earth? Not much. Not unless we're telling people about Jesus and doing those kind of things. But I want you to see that what he's seeing from the perspective of that, and this is somebody who's walked away from God, if you think about it from that, not completely, but he's at least realistic to see it. Now, we don't know, did Solomon, was he a believer, is he truly saved and so on like that? We don't really have that information. You would think that it is, and as we get to the end of Ecclesiastes, like, okay, yeah, he's just really like kind of talking this part out. And I think sometimes we need to talk out those frustrating things. But we don't have the same problems that King Solomon had. We have Jesus. Aren't you happy that you got Jesus? In John chapter 10 and verse 7, and we'll read you a few verses here. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out, and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." And you can see and get the sensation now that Jesus puts us in an opposite perspective of how King Solomon starts out. Well, I may not have a lot in this world, but I got King Jesus. Everything may be crumbling around me, and the things that the truths and the realities that we're going to see inside the book of Ecclesiastes, man, those things hit home because it's the same in your life and it is in mine. When you're young, you're ambitious, you got all these goals and all these things going on, and when you get old, you're like, man, this is a mess. And it's weird how that perspective moves. I'd like to think that I still have a pretty positive perspective on things, but I'm probably wrong. I'm sure people go, man, that old grumpy guy complains about everything. And I don't think that I am, but you never know. I mean, because people will tell you when you find you to be wrong. And so Jesus basically is like, all that stuff. He didn't say that directly here, but the idea is that mindset that people can get into. Don't worry about that. Now I want you to understand these few things before we really get into the book, because I think it helps us a lot. The Apostle Paul has a similar look, but listen to what he says, only 8 verses long. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 50. I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on the immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Now, is that a great answer for it or what? We look around at life and we think, oh man, but Jesus made it clear. He's there. Paul makes it clear also. Now, an odd admission from me, and I know you guys are going to be like, what? I can't believe you. I've always had my phone on shuffle for my music and stuff, so it just helps me when I don't, like, if I stay really focused on what I'm hearing, I don't stay focused on what I'm doing. And if I'm really focused on what I'm doing, it's like I've gone deaf and I can't hear it. So I just have music playing in the background, and that's pretty common for a lot of people, I suppose. But lately, I put it on the classic and I hit rotate, hit shuffle or whatever. And of course, if you've been around me or you've been around my mom or whatever like that, it's always, Handel's Messiah always is somewhere in the mix. And so I found myself listening to the whole thing like 3-4 times in the last week. And if you know anything about Handel's Messiah, they basically just took scripture and put it to music. And so I hear this lady saying, "Oh, death, where is your..." I can't sing it like her. Whoa, she sings it so much differently than I do. "Oh, death, where is your sting?" And so, anyways, as I see this, I'm just reminded, it's like, you know what? We don't have the problems that Solomon is looking at and seeing. Is there problems? Absolutely. Again, let me say this one more time in verse 3 where it says, "What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun?" What do we gain when it's all done? When you've finished living your life, when you've finished running the race, as Paul might say, you're 115 years old because you lived it out right. You ate well, you exercised, and all that stuff, things that I don't do. But you've done all those things, and you get to the end, you hit the finish line. Where are you going? You're going to heaven. It's like not too bad, right? What on earth did you gain that you take to heaven? Can't take your house. Can't take your car. I am one of these weirdos. I like doing all sorts of stuff, right? There's currently a power project on my kitchen island. And it's like obnoxiously big. It'll be gone tonight or tomorrow. It's a project for somebody else. I'm helping them out. But it's like I am so interested in things that I can do with my hands. Where is that going to get me in heaven? It just isn't. Does that mean that doing things on this earth, polishing up the old pulpit, as John did for us, me building, helping folks out and stuff like that, does that mean that it's like for nothing? No. We're doing service to others and of course for Jesus. And I think, it's like, it's easy to get caught up in that mindset that says, man, I've wasted my life. I can't think of exactly the quote, but it's a Mark Twain quote. And it says that in 20 years, like I said, I'm going to misquote it a little bit, but you look it up, you'll find it. In 20 years, you'll be either, so how's, in 20 years, you'll have more regret for the things you didn't do than the things you did. So in other words, whatever you do, like, okay, that's fine. Those are experiences. But those things you didn't do while living, it's like, man, that's where your regrets are going to come in. Like, I should have done this. I should have done that. And I've got those. Everybody has those. You just have those. And so if there's something you just like, let me push forward. Maybe God's pushing you in a direction, right? You just don't know. And so we see that mindset and we say, look, that's where I need to be. And so now as we go to look at the rest of it, all these, and we might even call this grumpy old man chapter. The chapters 1 and 2 are kind of a continuation. We're not going to cover 2 tonight. I didn't allot for that much time. But listen to the mindset and the questions, because they're all great questions or statements or whatever. I'm not going to read a chunk of them, and then we'll stop and we'll kind of discuss it as we go. Yes, I'm sorry, he gave me the right quote. Thank you. 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did. That is not more true. I'm telling you right now, it's so, so true. Thank you for that. I've actually used that same quote, and this is why I should have it memorized by now, because I've said it there've been like a big organization with the I did it at one of the band banquets or whatever, and I said that, and hey guys, be motivated, be encouraged, and they're starting to get that way, right? Finally. It's taken them a while on a new band director, but they're getting there. So the rest of what he says, and of course I'm saying he has really not said anything positive yet, and we're not going to hear any real positive stuff in this